I just want to say I first met Ralph, or actually heard about Ralph Nader in a serious way when I was 18 years old and a freshman in college, which was a long time ago. And I heard Ralph on the radio. I don't remember what he was talking about, but I remember precisely where I was and where I was standing, because it was such a momentous occasion for me. I was so inspired and so galvanized by his words that I decided at that moment in time that I wanted to be a public interest lawyer. And I'm not the only one who has a story like this, believe you me. And many years later, I found myself in Washington and had the opportunity to work in various Nader organizations. And so I have Ralph to thank for my public interest trajectory, career, and I also have him to thank for my personal life, because that's how I met my partner and my husband, Eric Lizenstein, who also worked in the Nader network. So I have to thank Ralph for all the great things that have happened in my life. And I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to have him come and speak to you guys, because he really is sort of the father of public interest law. And to have him come and speak to our new clinic is very special for me, and I hope for you guys too. He is the public citizen of our country. For decades, he's been fighting the good fight against greedy corporations, against government malfeasance. He is inspiring. He never stops. He's got so much energy. And one of the wonderful things I love about Ralph is that he doesn't just criticize the status quo. He always has about 5 or 6 really good ideas in his pocket for how we should do things differently. So I'm so happy that he agreed to come and speak to you guys in a small, informal setting like this. Without any further ado, Ralph Nader.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. This is an interesting subject for me. I have to make it a little personal because this area of the law of animal welfare, animal rights, different configurations of its description, is almost inherently public interest law when you think about it, right from the get-go. Who's your client, right? And it's not only that, it's that it has developed a incredible consciousness about the connection between the natural world, the animal kingdom as they called it, and the human world. Barry Commoner, the great ecologist, once said that the first law of ecology is that everything is connected to everything else. So here I am, I'm 9 years old, and my father said, you got to do something about that rabbit that's eating the vegetables in our backyard garden. And so I was the watchdog. And after a few hours, this intrepid rabbit came for its meal. And I lit out after it. And it took off. For some reason, I caught up to it with a huge boulder in my hand, a big rock. And so I knew that I could kill that rabbit. And I had it just like this. And the rabbit froze and looked at me with big eyes. It was like 3 feet. And I couldn't let go of that big rock. And I couldn't figure out why. And that was really my start in fighting violence of all kinds. That one experience. And I can visualize it right now. And after a few hours, I said to myself, what was the rabbit's crime? It was looking for a meal. And then I proceeded not to do anything about it for 30 years. And then when Kathy and Eric opened their law firm, after having worked at the Public Citizen Litigation Group, at the time it seemed an important but narrow specialty, which at that time was embodied in the main organization, the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So it's prevent cruelty to animals, sadistic cruelty, industrial cruelty, domestic cruelty. And, you know, people who are cruel to animals usually end up being cruel to people too, or it's the same, cut from the same cloth. It's brutalizing. And then I started looking into this, and I realized, just look at how it interlocks with everything. I just jotted down a list here. If we don't respect the intelligence of animals, we will be more likely to destroy their habitat. I once was walking home with my dad, and someone shouted out about some dog. Look at that dumb dog. And my father said, yeah, that dumb dog doesn't soil its own nest like we do. And he went through a whole list of what animals, you know, except for some primates, they don't declare war on each other. True, they do eat each other. But it struck me that the interlock now with the whole ecology movement is inextricable. So, and with the public health movement. Number one, if you respect the intelligence of animals, you will more likely want to secure their habitat. Now, why do you want to respect the intelligence of animals? Because they have things to teach us that we wouldn't think of in a million years. They can teach us how to detect, how to smell, how to taste, how to perpetuate, how to alert themselves, how to plan for the future, like we can't do as supposedly intelligent human beings. For example, I grew up looking at squirrels who used to frequent a huge maple tree outside our home. And I would look at these squirrels, and they would leap from twigs on the maple tree to twigs on the next maple tree, 20 feet above the ground. I never saw one miss. How many times have you seen people slip and fall? What is it in that squirrel that calculated the physics of that safe leap? So if we just think of a dumb squirrel, it's nothing more than a big rat with a tail. We lose out on all things, the ability of mere moths to detect hundreds of yards away. A moth. So it gets into a huge reservoir of scientific exploration. The periwinkle plant, as a lot of us know in Madagascar, led to a child leukemia drug. And radar leaped off the sonar capabilities of owls, and on and on. So if we don't respect them because they have a right to live, we should respect them because they have a lot to teach us. That's true for flora and fauna as well. The second thing is, what happens if they become extinct? Well, look at the latest revelation. The volume of insects is down up to 40% this year around the world. People say, well, thank goodness, you know, who needs insects? Now millions of people are realizing that without insects, we can't live on the planet. So you see, the extinction thing now is not just a prediction of biologists or ecologists. The extinction of species not only denies us all kinds of future knowledge, but it's part of the web of life. Critical. I mean, I took biology at university. I could not write 1,000 words on the critical function of earthworms. Do you know what would happen to agriculture without earthworms? And you know how many earthworms there are in an acre? It's a fabulous number of earthworms. We just grow up ignorant of all of this. Then the decline of the fisheries, the sudden decline of the cod off the coast of New England and Nova Scotia, was the first real signal a few decades ago. But now we're moving toward where our children will not be consuming fish from the ocean. It'll all be aquaculture. Then there's the whole area of zoonotic diseases. And we saw, of course, we see that with malaria, but it's opening up a whole area of prevention, of public health, prevention all over the world, this exploding area of knowledge. And you might have read the reviews of that new book on mosquitoes, where the author made this incredible claim. I have trouble believing it, but he said, out of the 130 billion human beings who've lived on Earth, almost half of them have been killed by mosquitoes. So, again, you see, you disrupt the habitat, you spread the range, you handle them with like DDT, they mutate and they become resistant. So they teach us basically that if you abuse nature beyond the point, nature turns on its abusers. And that's what we're seeing now with climate disruption, obviously. It can absorb a lot of abuse, dissipate a lot of abuse, mitigate a lot of abuse, but it meets a marginal line when it turns on its perpetrators with an unbridled ferocity. And then we see the medicines that are coming from flora and fauna. This is a very controversial area, using animals for experimentation, but I think there's good progress in that level. That's being reduced by the cosmetic companies. They're not doing rabbits so much anymore. Primates are no longer being used, except in the underworld of that situation. And then there is the industrial agriculture, which is the ultimate cruelty, where you basically brutalize them. I went to an Iowa beef plant once when I was going around the country. And I don't know if you've ever been to a modern beef slaughtering place. Anybody been to a modern beef slaughtering? God, you cannot possibly believe it. You have these cattle, they're moving toward their destruction, and they know it. And they're moving. And then within a matter of minutes, there's nothing left. The hoofs, the hides, they're stripped, the blood, I mean, the whole thing is automated. And the brutalization of that process now is resulting in the studies about the health effects of eating beef and other fat-filled meat products. And it's also moving into the area of methane release and greenhouse gases. So now it connects with climate disruption, and it's not a modest quantity as well. Then you have the area of soil erosion and pollution of the waterways from industrial, huge gatherings of millions of pigs, cattle, and chickens. And now it's being connected with the overuse, has been for years, of antibiotics for prophylactic purposes, which are getting into our bodies. So for many people in this country, the biggest residue of pharmaceuticals does not come from the prescriptions or over-the-counter drugs. It comes from eating domesticated meat and poultry products. So if you want any more justification for the importance of this field, how about the aesthetic one? The beauty of the insects, the beauty of the mammals, the reptiles. And you can over-idealize something like that. But the aesthetic impulse in human beings is primary. It's really hard to see anything more important to people. Just ask them, for example, are you hard up for money? Yes. Well, here's $5 million. In return, you will have a 9-inch extension of your nose for the rest of your life. Is that a deal? How many people would take that? So the ugliness of our environment, which is man-made, what we've done to the land and to the water, and to the air, and to the mountains and the valleys, is not a superficial result of human overreach. It's a very serious destruction of our aesthetic impulses and the beauty. I just was walking out 2 days ago and I saw a garter snake. Beautiful 16-inch garter snake, trying to make a living, trying to survive. So I think in many ways we all look for entry levels to improve this world of ours, but animal welfare, animal rights, and the connection of all living things to the human condition and the life on planet, on Earth, is now becoming very, very manifest. Obviously, you've read some of the books where we idealize lions and idealize elephants and so forth, and there are deadly insects and poisonous snakes, but that all fits in. I mean, it's not something that is their own fault, but it all fits in with the proper attention and the proper ranking of policies in terms of human safety and the protection of future generations. So public interest law is really critical to this kind of work, which means there has to be more jobs, more centers like this around the country. Everybody has their own emotional intelligence focus on something they think is horrendously bad or cruel. And I see more, in some ways, more mass movements for animal rights than for a lot of human rights. I mean, you can fill a congressional hearing with animal welfare people, and you couldn't fill a congressional hearing for a lot of serious legislative inquiries into the human condition. So it's important to try to reach everybody's nerve point that says, well, I really don't care much about the Pentagon budget, and I don't care much of tax laws, but I really care about this part, and I really care about that part. I just was over talking to the law students in Milstein C1, and I told them to be very careful about becoming too technical in your law and forgetting the greater purposes of the law, and that you have a role as a lawyer as well as an attorney. And as an attorney, you're representing your clients zealously and making your fees, but as a lawyer, you're looking out for the overall condition of justice in your society. So you have dual role, and most of your courses will deal with training you as a lawyer, as a technician, and very few will give you the bigger view of jurisprudence and equity and legal history courses and the like. And I knew I was fighting a losing fight, because I've done this for many years, and the magnetic pull, as Pete Davis has pointed out 2 years ago when he was a student here, he wrote this book, The Bicentennial Crisis of Harvard Law School. And it's online. And Peter, where's Pete? Yeah, Pete's right there. That there's a magnetic pull toward corporate law, corporate interest law. And it's not just the money, because now you can come out of Harvard with minimal debt. They have all kinds of programs. It's the so-called prestige and the intellectual challenge. Spare me, intellectual challenge. These corporate lawyers have enabled and shoehorned most of the worst behavior of corporations. They're the architects of corporate impunity, corporate immunity, corporate waivers and regulatory agencies, and corporate evasion from law enforcement. And what Pete is trying to show is that the mission of the Harvard Law School, that declared mission, is to graduate leaders supposed to look out for the well-being and justice of society, is not parallel with the kind of courses that will encourage students to go into public interest law, to create maybe their own groups, as some law school graduates have done, created their own environmental groups like NRDC. It was 4 graduates, class of 1970, Yale, Harvard. And or start their litigation group after a few years of practice in more conventional fields, or try to get Harvard's law school endowment to start public interest law institutions in different fields all over the country. Why not? They set up an international taxation group for the multinationals taxation. They have curriculum that are tailor-made for corporate law firms to profit from. Why not have a public interest adjunct and start these groups and have Yale and Michigan, Bolt Hall, whatever, do the same thing? In our class of 1958 at Harvard, I had very little in common with my classmates. They were mostly corporate lawyers. And one day we got together, about 8 of us, at lunch in Washington, and we said, let's do something at the next reunion that can we really be proud of, instead of brag about our cases. And one of them said, yeah, but you know, how are we going to agree on anything? I said, I think we can agree on one thing. They said, what? That there's not too much justice in America. And they said, I think you're right. And we started the Appleseed Foundation, and it's now has 16 laws for center. They're called Centers for Law and Justice in 16 states. Now, some of them are pretty small, but that's just one law school class. What if 1,000 law school classes, 35 years or more out of law school, did something like that? Look how many opportunities for positions for young students. It's one thing to tell young law students, go into public interest, don't sell out, don't trade your talents for a pot of gold. And they say, where are the jobs? And, you know, they have a point. There aren't enough of them. I don't think there are 2,000 public interest lawyers in the country out of 1.1 million lawyers. And so we really need to galvanize, and an institute like this institute is a good harbinger. It's a good example of what can be done. And it's a heck of an educational forum for broadening people's views about, yeah, I know, we shouldn't be cruel to animals, to you're just committing suicide on the installment plan if you destroy the animal environment in our world. And that's extremely important to get people who are otherwise, you know, not impelled to help save humans, they're impelled to help save animals. It's all interwoven. So let's see if I have one more thing here. Malaria. Now here's a little bit of hazards here. The approach to malaria, which kills over 1.5 million people, many of them kids and pregnant women, a year, is that they're now going to bioengineer them out of perpetuating themselves, so they make them sterile. And there's a lot of talk now about cloning pig organs for human transplant and so on. And this needs a lot more attention than it's getting. This is where science is getting ahead of any legal and ethical framework of caution and oversight. Because driven by agribusiness, you can just see them drooling with the profits. Driven by the medical industry, there are not enough organ donations, and they're using bioengineering on what they consider other intrusive biota. And I think that's something that law student clinics like this should be looking into in a very, very intensive way. Because once this thing gets approved, they've already approved the first bioengineered salmon, which grows to twice the size of the salmon. It went through a lot of legal hoops, but they overpowered the public interest law firm that's been fighting it. And the FDA has approved it. It's just a matter of months now before we see it, and we're not quite sure it's even going to be labeled. So I just thought I'd convey the gravity and importance of what Kathy Myers and her staff and the students are trying to do, because this area of humanity tends to be pigeonholed. And I did a book called Animal Envy in order to educate myself. I read a lot of the literature, and so I said, what would happen if a brilliant software developer could create a language where all species could speak to one another and all of the animal kingdom could speak to us? What would they have been saying all these years? So he creates this language, and he gives it to elephants, lions, dolphins, and so forth. And they can't believe their good luck, because they've been wanting to tell us off for years. And so they develop a triad made up of an owl, an elephant, and a dolphin. And they are given by this developer who has connections 100 hours of global TV time. And so their job is to program it, is to make sure the reptiles have their say, the insects have their say. And I gave it to PETA. I figured PETA would easily promote this. And the woman who heads PETA, she said, "Oh, I love it, Ralph." He's British. They're just up the street. Yeah, she says, "I love it, Ralph, but the only people we highlight are nutty people who are celebrities." I said, "Well, can I be nutty for a day?" So she, so she didn't publicize it. But I thought the interest in this book is in indicating it's sort of an exercise in animal empathy and insect empathy. And it's everything I didn't learn in biology class. And in doing this, I never had a better time. I never had so much fun. Some of my own personal experiences, and also the things you read about in the paper and so forth. Why don't we ask the animals? Why don't we ask the mammals, the reptiles, the birds, the fish, the insects? Look what they're holding up for us, the fabric of life and our planet. And I had great fun talking of how they patronized humans. How, your ears aren't worth anything. One dog said, "I can hear 200 times better than you. What are you lording it over me for? You're driving me nuts. I have to hear all these sirens in Washington, D.C., 30 miles away. All you can hear them is 1 mile." So we get to understand how really intelligent they are. Now, there are books written on the intelligence of dogs, obviously, but it's just unbelievable, the adaptation ability of the smallest insect you can imagine, never mind the more complex organisms of mammals and reptiles. The idea of adaptation. Have you heard of the crocodile bird? Okay, the crocodiles get all kinds of stuff in their teeth. So they developed this modus vivendi with the crocodile bird. A bird comes, the crocodile opens its jaws, and the bird cleans its teeth. There are a million stories like that. You want to interest young people in the survival of our planet. That's one great way to interest them. It's just absolute wonder. It's absolute awe. The number of beetle species there are, for example, and how so many of them have different ways of adapting to their environment. You notice the science section of the New York Times? Do you ever read the science thing? You ever marvel about half of it is about animals and insects? It's a science section, because that's where discovery is now. That's where discovery, biomedical discovery, environmental discovery, incredible adaptation that we can learn from to harsh environments deep in the ocean, for example. Okay, so I have talked enough. Can we have a conversation?
Sure.
Okay.